Right. Well, good morning, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started while other folks are joining us. Thank you all for coming, particularly first thing on a Thursday morning. We are excited about this morning session and our speaker, Brent Stevens. Let me do a couple quick announcements for all of us as we get started. And so, first of all, just as we're getting started, if you all would go into the chat and just write your name and the organization you're with, so we have a sense of who all is with us today. Um, you will see when you came on that our session is being recorded. So we will post the recording to the Community Foundation's nonprofit resources page in about a week or so. So if you want to access it at that point, we will be sending out an email letting you know when it's available and you can re-watch the recording. You'll also notice that we enable closed captioning on this to allow folks to be able to better see if they have any issues with hearing, to be able to know what we're talking about here with our speakers. So you can disable that if you want to. And a couple other announcements for the nonprofit partners that are with us today. If you applied to the foundation through our responsive grant program, know that we are in the thick of reviewing those. We've got 6 teams of volunteers working right now on that. If you log into our system, you will not see your application when it's under review, but know that it is in there and we are in that process, and you'll hear from us in early November. And then finally, of course, we want to focus on our session today, but we are always planning future sessions as well. So in September, our session will be in person, and it is going to focus on fundraising planning. Holly Cobia, who has an extensive background in fundraising and communications, is going to be working with us in an in-person workshop. So keep an eye out in your emails for more information and how to register for that session. So today we are delving into AI. I know many folks have maybe dabbled in it before. For others of us, we know very little, if anything, about it. But we know that it is something that could be useful to our organizations if harnessed properly. So we're really excited to have Brent Stevens of 5 Points Creative. As I mentioned in an email yesterday, we have had a long partnership with 5 Points Creative. You have heard from Bruce Bryan and others there about different aspects of storytelling, communications. They're just kind of a wealth of information. And so when they had an AI expert, so to speak, we jumped on that right away. So excited to have Brent with us this morning. He is the story listener. I love the titles at 5 Points Creative. If you all take a look at their website, they're fantastic. But I will let Brent introduce himself and take it away with our session on AI writing. So Brent, it's over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Jessica. That was a lot to live up to. About the AI workshop expert, I definitely have like many of you all out there, struggled and enjoyed and hated at times AI. But I think it's here with us, and I find myself more and more just sort of having conversations with people about how to use it responsibly. It's a tool like anything else, right? We go all the way back to fire. It can burn us down, or it can heat our food and keep us warm, right? So I think it's the same thing with AI. And my purpose really here today is not only to sort of present some things I've learned about AI over the years, but also to learn from you all. So we'll leave a generous amount of time because I want to know what you all are doing in your organizations with it. Just a little bit of background. As Jessica said, I work for 5 Points Creative. I have a lot of nonprofits in my client book. Blue Roots Behavioral Health, the Roanoke Valley Collective Response, Partnership for Community Wellness, Mill Mountain Theater, and more all the time. And really, this workshop first evolved out of my work with the Roanoke Valley Collective Response. I wanted to give their members something that will help them save time, money, and energy, right? All things that are even, especially lately, becoming shorter and shorter and scarcer. So that's kind of my purpose today, and I'm really thankful to be here. So without further ado, I'll pop up the PowerPoint, and we'll just do this for about 20-25 minutes, and then open it up for discussion in that way. And then, like I said, I really envision the latter part of this being a conversation with you all about your concerns about AI, successes with AI, frustrations with AI, and we can all have that conversation together. So let's see here. Okay. Okay, everybody can see that okay? All right, so that's me. And then this is just, like I said, a quick kind of overview of what I'm thinking here. My other hat, and this is where this came up, is I've taught writing for 30 years at basically all the institutions within an hour of here. Not Radford, though. I think someone might be here from Radford, but in every kind of iteration you can think of. For the last 15 years before I became to 5 Points, I worked at Hollins University as the writing center director. So about 3 or 4 years ago, I began to see, this creeping in and faculty becoming more and more concerned, and we can talk about some of that later. But and what my main part of my job was training tutors to work with students, and then also doing some tutoring myself for graduate students and higher level things like that. And again, this kind of came in really on the battle lines in that theater, if you will, of people, of my tutors coming to me and not knowing what to do. That AI early on was very easy to spot. I know right now there's a lot of conversation about M dashes, like that's a tell when people have used AI. I love M dashes, so that's frustrating to me because I write with a lot of M dashes, but when it first came out, it was very easy to discern when people had used AI. And of course, it's becoming harder and harder as the large language model kind of, if you will, gobbles up more and more content. And it's become much more sophisticated. And of course, that is going to keep on going. But one of the first things I did at Hollins was this everything I know about writing in 30 minutes or less. We should be able to get through it in about 20 minutes today. But the sort of my foundational beliefs in teaching writing carry over to AI. And so, well, I'll show you. We're going to start with a couple of sort of tools, if you will, to sort of think about writing in some new ways, and then we'll kind of convert that over to how that works with AI. So that's what we'll be doing. So let's start out here. All right. So the first thing that I use in all of my work, my current work with everything from copywriting to emails to my work at Hollins, where a lot of times, a lot of the work I did was with cover letters. And if you're hiring out there, some of you may have the unfortunate duty of reading through a stack of them. And a lot of times the first line is something along the lines of, I'm a junior majoring in biology, and I've always loved the natural world, right? Things like that as a first line. And when you read about 30 of those in a row, you probably want to rethink your career, or at least maybe off-put the hiring process to someone else. So again, and the analogous version of this in a student paper, and look, no judgment. I'm sure if you went back and looked at my undergraduate papers, I started out this way too. But a first line that says something along the lines of pollution is a prevalent problem in today's world, right? There's a lot of reasons for this. I think one of them is the old 5 paragraph essay where you start off very general, you work up to a thesis statement, you have 3 supporting paragraphs, and then you restate what you said at the end. And it's a very American, I think, process toward approach to academic paper. If you think about it, it's like first I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do, and then I'm going to do it, and then to make sure you got it, I'm going to tell you again what I just did, right? And so, and it leads to a lot of generalities, and I think it actually hinders students getting to a deeper sort of conversation. And obviously, we live in a world that's so flooded with information that we almost have to index from the top down, so to keep ourselves sane. But you'll see this with Google searches that we do. People will start off with something very generic, like let's use today AI in nonprofits, right? And so you put that in, and you start to see what bubbles up. But in all of those cases, it's much better to write from the bottom up. And what I mean by that is thinking about moments. For an example, if you think about a cover letter, what I used to teach my students to do was to think about 3 moments in either their internship or their classes or even their lives that sort of illustrate these qualities that they want to get across to an employer. One of the best examples, actually, using this line here, one of the best examples I ever had came from one of my own tutors. She was applying for graduate school in biology, and the first line of her cover letter was something along the lines of, basically what I just said a minute ago. as a as a junior majoring in biology, I've always loved the natural world. That was her first line. And if you think about it, anyone that's applying to graduate school in biology probably love the natural world, right? It's that doesn't distinguish you. And it starts off with a kind of a very bad initial relationship with the reader. So I said to her, her name was Pauline. I said, Pauline, we've got to get deeper here. So I just had a conversation with her, and it turned out that she had an amazing story that kind of illustrated that. When she was from Malaysia, and every morning she used to walk to school with her mom past these tidal pools. And lo and behold, her favorite thing, kind of game with her mother, was to sort of name the different creatures that were trapped in these tidal pools. And her favorite animal was the anemone, a sea anemone. So she, lo and behold, she applied to the University of Georgia, I think it was, and we did some due diligence and found out that they have the largest sea anemone collection in North America. So you put that detail about the school up with that detail about her, and that's the magic, I think, and that's what distinguishes a good cover letter. But that lesson of writing from the bottom up really, I think, carries over to any kind of writing you do. And we'll talk about how that works in AI for a minute. But when you can, try to not index from the top down. I mean, sometimes it's necessary, but we'll talk about that with some illustrations in a second. Um, so the other thing is, like I said, about capturing moments, and this is an example of something that I'm really excited about, that we're going to be doing with the Roanoke Valley Collective Response in a few years. This is one of our storytellers. We do this series of videos called Places of Recovery, and it features someone in our area in Southwest Virginia, um, finding recovery and sort of telling their story in like a 3-minute kind of version. So this actually ended up on the cutting room floor. It's not in. This is Kat from Piedmont Community Center, and so, but this is an illustration of a necklace that she got from her grandmother. And she told the story of how this necklace was kind of validation for her, because when she came out of jail, for opioid, for drug crimes, she was feeling all this shame, and her grandmother gave her this necklace, and it lifted her up. And so you see her quote here: "I don't have to hang my head in shame at family dinners." So right now we're working on a piece that we're going to try to do at a museum, basically featuring 20 or so people's stories in recovery, and then kind of having an object under glass, or that sort of captures their recovery process. And so there's this necklace, I'm hoping, I haven't talked to Kat about it yet, is going to be under glass with sort of a museum kind of quality placard sort of telling this story. But rather than, kind of starting from the top, many people have found recovery in the Roanoke Valley, right? Or in the Southwest Virginia. I mean, I envision it sort of, going right to the heart of things, and maybe even starting with this quote to sort of capture people's imagination. Um, so those two things, like writing, this is an example of one way you can kind of write from the bottom up, of finding a moment that illustrates what you're trying to do. And in a lot of you all's work, right, that might be capturing the imaginations of donors, right? So finding those details about the stories, of the people you serve, and more than most people can do that. They can identify a person in a story, but they even then, a lot of times the copy I see about those wonderful people and stories is too generic. It doesn't come at this deep detail level. And the details, it's sort of counterintuitive, because you think you can capture people's you can connect with an audience by being general enough to sort of say, oh, I recognize myself in that. But even though I'm sure none of you have this specific story of a necklace being given to your grandmother as a way to sort of bolster your ego, that story resonates because you have something probably similar that it sparked. And so that's what you're trying to do in all kinds of writing, is sort of lay down these little moments that have the potential to connect deeply with your reader. I'm going to try not to go through too fast with this. Any comments or sort of like things that any of you all sparks when I kind of tell that, or even any examples from your own work that maybe this advice you've already taken or used, or anything along those lines. Okay, well, we can keep going, and we'll have plenty of time for this later. I like to think about writing too. Another way to kind of capture this sort of writing from the bottom up is anything that you read, listen to, or watch. People don't do it anymore, but if I'm watching a movie, a lot of times it drives my family crazy because I'm a film scholar and I want to get down a thought. So I'll look at the time stamp, an hour, 15 minutes, and 25 seconds, and I'll write down, a scene where the killer is revealed, right? And then I'll get my thought down and index that moment. And so that when I go to try to write about something like a film or prepare for like a review for the Granite or something, I've got a moment that I can kind of draw upon and use to sort of build these things. And so that process, some of you, it could just be called note taking, but I like to think of it as marginalia. If you think about the text, it's the sort of your thoughts that sort of hover. People used to write in the margins, for those of you who are old enough to remember doing that in your books and photographed essays. But then that material is a great, is how you kind of write from the bottom up. That's how you find those moments. So you've got like a quote from the text, or if it's a song, you've got a moment in the song, any of those kinds of things. And then you've also got your idea about it. And then that's the stuff that you can kind of use to build something from the bottom up. Then you begin to look at, okay, well, I cited three different moments that talk about the color blue in this film, right? So then I can understand how to begin to build the paper and or any kind of writing in that way, and it comes from the bottom up. So that's what I mean by that. All right, so the second tool that I really want to get across is any type of text, and I'm using this term in what Mikhail Bakhtin, he was a person who wrote a lot of theory about narrative. And so he thinks of a text as anything that can be interpreted. So obviously a film, a radio ad, a poem, this PowerPoint, right? This presentation can all be a text that can be interpreted in that way. Taylor Swift is a text, right? We could have a great conversation about what Taylor Swift means in our culture. And so these are four ways to break down those texts that I've found very useful. And it's got a nice little mnemonic here, SOAP, that helps you to remember. But I'm actually going to start in reverse order. So obviously, first of all, you have to have a purpose. And that can be slippier than people think. A lot of times, especially if it's something creative, writers are notoriously evasive about what their work means. But surely that if you really pinned them to the ground, they would tell you what the purpose of this paragraph was, or what their overall goal of getting across their ideas, that things like that. But even with things that are more functional than that, like a lot of the writing that you all probably do at your institutions, it's really good to have, I think, a quick thought about what is my purpose here. What am I trying to convey? What am I trying to get across? Um, and so this is an example of someone that didn't do that work. This is Clint Eastwood. This happened in 2012 at the Republican convention. And of course, the Republicans were psyched because they got a bona fide Hollywood star, right? And Clint Eastwood has some political experience. Some of you may not know that, but he was a mayor at Carmel by the Sea for many years. And so his purpose was really basically, he said it pretty much up front. He says, Obama's a nice guy, but we've got no jobs, right? And basically, this is called the empty chair speech. He had nothing to say. He did not prepare for this speech. And so for about 4 or 5 minutes, it's very painful. You can watch it online. He pretended Obama was in the chair and sort of kept saying things like, so, Mr. President, when you go out and you think about jobs, I mean, do you have a plan? Anyway, so it never goes beyond this sort of high level generic approach to the subject. So if Clint had come to me and he was preparing for the speech, I would have said, Clint, you were a mayor at a small town called Carmel by the Sea for many years. Did you ever face a moment when the tuna canning factory was closing and you had to tell your constituents what your plan was, or anything along those lines? I would help him try to find these moments that would illustrate his purpose of that Mitt Romney was going to be better with jobs, right? And I know that because I had this approach when I was a politician at Carmel by the Sea, and Mitt Romney will do the same things that I did, right? Blah blah blah. So again, I think that all too often people don't think about purpose enough, and we'll talk about how all this translates to the language of prompting with AI in here in a second. The second element is audience. And So I'm a comic book nut. My kids ran a couple of stands at Sweet Donkey and at Pops for many years. I have right now in my basement, I have about 8,000 comics sitting in boxes, driving my wife crazy. But so I often think about a lot of times my mind will jump to little panels and pieces that I've absorbed over the years. That kind of visual rhetoric, it's called. It just kind of pops in and I can use it. That is not what happened with this cover. I did some research on it, but this is an example of a comic book cover that has a complete fail. So if you think about our first sort of piece here, purpose, the purpose, anybody out there want to answer this? What is the purpose of a comic book cover? Some of you are old enough to probably remember going to 7-Eleven and flipping through a comic book stand. Anybody, what's the purpose of a comic book cover?
Chiming in the chat, grabbing attention, getting people to buy it.
Yeah, getting people to buy it, right. So, I mean, and again, it's got to compete with all those other comic book covers on the stand, right? So, you all probably, some of you did this, you flipped through and something captivated your imagination on the cover. Well, so the audience for Betty and Veronica, I actually looked this up, obviously, is between 8 and 14 at the time. This is from the 1970s. And so if you think about that, the messaging on the front is really, really problematic. So you're trying to attract the attention of a 10-year-old girl to lay out her 20 cents for this comic book. And Betty says, Ronnie, there's someone I want you to meet. Is it someone important or is it a girl? Right? So you're insulting your audience on the cover. Again, there might be enough people that just buy Betty and Veronica and don't even bother to process these details. But I actually looked up sales figures for Betty and Veronica in the 1970s, and this issue sold significantly less than the issues around it. And to me, the kicker, and this is again a film kind of thing, but we're often very uncomfortable when something looks out at us from the frame. If you can imagine breaking that fourth wall in a film. And to me, the capper is this woman in the lower left corner. I'm not sure what her purpose is, but to me, it's kind of like, is it someone important or is it a girl? And I can almost imagine a bubble coming from her saying, "Yeah, girls suck." You know what I mean? It's like, kind of like the exclamation point on this messaging because it makes us uncomfortable that she's looking at us. So again, you all's audiences are very complex. When we work on a website for someone like Partnership for Community Wellness, we have to think about parents of the issues of teenagers that are struggling with the issues. We have to think about the kids that they go into schools and talk about. We have to think about donors. We have to think about peer counselors. And so you all have very, very complicated audience structures. And one of the things that's great about AI is once you get something crafted, you can, with a keystroke, say, okay, I've written this great piece for donors. Now I want to get across this same story to, say a group of concerned parents. And it can instantly do that. It can kind of adapt what you're doing to that audience. And it's something that I think is very hard to learn. You see this again in politicians, and it doesn't matter what their political party is, but someone will go to the National Education Association or the National Rifle Association, and they won't change their stump speech. And I've always thought that that's just ridiculous. It's crazy that they don't do that. Okay, so that's audience. Any questions about these first two things, purpose or audience? Okay, you are a quiet crowd this morning. Okay, we'll keep going. Occasion. This is the slipperiest sort of, I think, concept to get across. Uh, Occasion is sort of looking at whatever your text is and thinking about how it will be contextualized, all the noise that goes on around that particular text. We can keep with Taylor Swift for a second, right? So she's getting ready to release a new album. As you can tell, I'm a Swiftie. She just had this big conversation on the Kelsey's podcast and that kind of thing. And so if I'm going to talk about Taylor Swift's value in our culture, I might reference a couple of those things on the front end, right? Just to sort of show my bona fides and to show that I'm aware of the current context of this text. And so another example of this from film, I think, if any of you all have seen Fight Club, this is a slight spoiler, but Fight Club ends with it has this sort of ongoing narrative about um, terrorism to sort of tear down materialism, right? So it talks about envisioning a New York City where elk run free and down Madison Avenue, right? Where all the things that I do actually, all the marketing and all the excess materialism have fallen away. So at the end, it has this disturbing scene where all these buildings collapse. They explode and they collapse. Well, if I was going to go give a presentation on Fight Club in, say, October of 2001 in Manhattan, I damn well better be prepared for people's minds to latch on to the ending of the film as a traumatic event, right? Something that re-traumatizes them about September 11th. And, I would be foolish if I didn't acknowledge that, because everybody at the end of that film would see that scene and go, why doesn't he talk about 9/11? Why didn't he prepare us for the trauma, right? It would be the marginalia in their mind. If you think about film as more and audiences sort of collective marginalia would be, why isn't he, the things that I'm saying, September 11th question mark? You can imagine somebody writing it on a pad and paper as the lights come up and they're thinking about, this conversation we're about to have about the film. So for you all's work, right, it's right now a current context affecting all of us, is the war against federal grants, right? I mean, that's something I think that all of us are thinking about. And so, how does that working through your organization? How does that affect a call to donors? If you listen to NPR, they're doing this right now. The way that they've kind of contextualized the current moment is starting off with thanking the people that stepped up when that funding was cut the day of, and then pivoting, of course, to the ask of helping us out, helping us keep the quality of NPR's programming intact. So that's something to think about. It's a deeper kind of thinking, but than purpose or audience. But I think it's really, really vital. And then, of course, there's style. And there's obviously what we call the lower order concerns. When I was a writing center director, there's grammar, vocabulary, kind of the visual presentation of information. I'm sure some of you all think about this when you're giving emails about what do you make bullet points and when do you do a paragraph break so that it's more reader friendly, so that your audience can kind of digest it. And then, of course, how visuals work in that way. And so again, I think that one of the things that sort of we're all facing right now is that there's so much information that comes at us, right? That it can be difficult to sort of think about style in sort of clear ways. But also AI, and again, we'll look at this in a second. AI can do some amazing things with this. First of all, it can certainly help you with these lower order things. I mean, you need to check it, right? Anybody that has used Microsoft Word for the last 10, 15 years is I'm sure has been disappointed with their grammar check function. I know I am all the time. It's amazing to me actually that they haven't gotten that better. I think part of it is, and this is a little bit of a rant, is that they used to have competitors, and now that they're basically the only word processing game in town, and so they haven't kept, kind of innovative in that way. But for y'all's purposes, right? I mean, you may, it again, obviously this is related to audience. You may very well have a very sophisticated group of academics, right? That you're kind of presenting what your organization does to, or or you may be trying at table sitting somewhere, and just people off the street are coming up and finding out what you're doing. And so AI is really good at taking that and adjusting style very quickly to sort of address those things. I'll often say things like, because as you can imagine, I've probably already illustrated this right now. I can tend to be pedantic. Everybody at work makes fun of me sometimes when I pop out a word. It's like, and I get it, right? My wife is also has a PhD in English, so we reinforce each other's bad habits on that front. But I often kind of will say, can you make sure that there's no language in here that's kind of too arcane? Well, case in point, I just did it again with arcane, right? But so things like that, I'll kind of, I know that that's a weakness of mine. And so I will, I will often use AI to kind of use that as a lens to kind of check my work in that way. So these are the four basic things. And I'll go back to that initial slide. SOAP, and it's a great way to sort of break down, like I said, any kind of rhetoric and think about these elements. So then, of course, the next step is to incorporate these ideas into prompting. And I thought what I would do first is sort of show you kind of how I use this in my work to build a radio commercial for Million Dollar Quartet, which is coming out at Mill Mountain Theater. And again, the basic premise is you can imagine like a sort of top-down approach to that might be along the lines of I'm writing a radio commercial for Mill Mountain Theater. that I know that I want to use something involving Elvis's style, and I want it to be humorous, right? And if I started with just that, it would spit out something very generic. It would probably, draw on things that are distractions. So because I said radio commercial, it probably would know that it needs to have an oral kind of style rather than a written kind of style. But it's going to give me something generic. And oftentimes when I have conversations with people about complaining about AI spitting out something that's not useful, it's because they have not done the work with the prompting, right? They've done something like that. They've done a top-down approach to the prompt. So one thing, of course, is to try to be very specific on the front end, and you can kind of use this list here to sort of to kind of front end anything you ask AI. Like I'll often identify myself. I'm a marketing professional in Southwest Virginia writing a radio commercial for Mill Mountain Theater. The audience is largely Gen X and over. It's for a commercial. It's a commercial that will air on Q99 on a morning show. I'll put all that in because you never know what of that information it will draw upon to give you an answer. So I kind of over-index in that way. So you see, and my purpose obviously is to sell tickets, but it kind of knows that, but I might put that in. And there might be another purpose too, right? Like to entertain or things like that. Um, the occasion might even crop up, right? Like this is the second time that Mill Mountain has done this show because it was brought back by popular demand. I think they did it 2 or 3 years ago. And then style, of course, it's got to be radio, it's got to be humorous, and I kind of want this Elvisy thing here that I'll talk about. So let me stop. I'm gonna give you the first draft that I had here. I'm gonna share that with you. Before I show that, any questions though? Again, I just want to make sure I'm giving opportunities for the marginalia that's popping in y'all's head for you all to voice that. Anyone?
There's one question from earlier in the chat, but it might still be
Oh,
relevant as you're
sorry.
thinking about writing from the bottom up. What Lisa asked, what kinds of questions do you ask to sort of get a story revealed? So maybe as you're talking to someone, or for those of us in the nonprofit sectors, we're talking to a donor or, a recipient of our services, what kinds of questions would you ask to get at those moments that you talk about?
That is a great question, and I will take a moment to pop in and first of all, I should have said this. There's a at the top of the chat. There's a link to a marketing blog I wrote on this very subject. Now, it's because it's a marketing blog. It's rather thin. It doesn't have a lot of I didn't have a lot of time to go into the details of all this. So it's a kind of a good 30,000 foot view of this presentation. I've also put my contact information, but weirdly, that question, Lisa, is I just did another marketing blog that I think came out a few weeks ago on the art of getting the most out of interviewees, basically trying to live up to my title of story listener. And so it's things like this. It's trying to get people to writing from the bottom up. So the first time that you have a conversation with someone, it's usually name, rank, and serial number, right? What's your function at your organization? Oh, for 30 years, I've been a peer counselor. Yeah, I love it. I get to work with people, right? Yeah, and I get to kind of empathize because I've been through these experiences, right? All that stuff is great. It does not stick in people's heads because it's too generic. So I try to ask questions that sort of set people up to get deep. So I'll say things like, in your work as a peer counselor, what is the thing that often crops up that you struggle with? Or can you think of a particular moment in a session that stays with you, over and over again? What that line between you as a peer counselor and the person that you're helping, are there ever any moments that you struggle with over identifying, right? Like that you have to be careful not that you're not telling your story versus trying to use your story to help other people. I mean, I'll ask things like that. I mean, obviously you can't do that right off the bat. You kind of have to ease people in, but it sets people up to be able to reveal these moments that you can kind of then use. And same thing, a lot of you times you all see these stories on the fly, right? And it's hard to do, but like you're at, say, a gala where someone's speaking, right, telling their story. Again, if you index after the fact, you probably are going to go generic. You'll say, oh, such and such told a great story about their struggles and how they overcame addiction by going to the Bradley Free Clinic's peer counseling sessions, like that kind of thing. But really, the work is the same thing I'm saying. It's trying to find those moments that you see resonate with an audience, and then sort of kind of indexing, building up from that, kind of indexing out in that way. Does that answer that question, Lisa? Okay.
Thinking so. I'm not hearing anything else.
Okay. I'll assume it did. Okay.
Yeah.
So let me just pop this up. This is the first version of the script that I had here. And again, just to make it easy, I'll kind of read it. I gotta flip up the. Okay. So again, this is my best version of Elvis. Okay, so this is the original thing that I scripted. Hey Dave, got a second? Uh-huh. Listen, we've had some complaints. You keep leaving your peanut butter and bananas out in the kitchen, and all the door handles have Vaseline on them from your hair. Uh-huh. But the main thing is your voice. You've got to quit speaking like Elvis all the time. I can't help it, Dick. I'm just so excited about Mill Mountain Theater's upcoming production of Million Dollar Quartet, opening September 17th. It's going to be a gas. Dick. But Million Dollar Quartet isn't just about Elvis. It's set on the historic night he spent with Carl Perkins, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Johnny Cash. Why don't you be one of them for a while? I've tried, but it comes out like this: Go, cat, go. Well, this show runs through October 12th, so hopefully it will be out of your system by then. No, it won't, you square. Rock and roll forever. Dick, you need help. I need tickets. Grab them at millmountain.org. So this was the first draft I had of this. And again, uh, I was happy with the concept. And again, it is not a groundbreaking concept. And that's one thing I have to kind of state here. I hear lots of people, especially in the creative field, being very uncomfortable with using AI. And I get it. And I think that there are some occasions and texts that you have to be very careful about. But in a lot of ways, it's a great literary critic. I mean, as someone who did that work for 30 years teaching, literature and film, I've been blown away by the feedback it gives me sometimes on things. But even more so, I honestly believe that really the whole, and I know we've got some university people out there, so this is going to be a slightly controversial, but we are large language models, right? And we're actually faulty large language models. And so all of my ideas come from all the stuff that I've consumed, right? And I can tell you that one of the things that resonated in the back of my mind for this piece was that old Mojo Nixon song, Elvis is Everywhere, Elvis is Everyone. I think one of my favorite lines is, why are all those planes and ships disappearing in the Bermuda Triangle? It's because Elvis needs ships, Elvis needs planes. Anyway, and so again, I think that even when we work creatively, we are drawing on the things that we've consumed. And so, again, that is not an original idea. Okay, I've got a writing commercial about Million Dollar Quartet. I've got someone that can't stop being Elvis. I mean, that was my original concept, right? But it's not even that original. And then, of course, as I went to write it, I tried to sort of index, Elvisy language. I think one of the places I really missed is I think I used that song, I used that phrase like "what a gas," and that's not Elvisy, right? So I can come up with a chat here. Hold on one second. I've got to share again. Um, Sorry, you all. Actually, I'll just walk you through it, and then we'll show the finished product. Let me get to back to the PowerPoint here. Um, okay, and then we'll go ahead. Okay, so there were I knew that there were some mistakes in it, but I basically asked AI. I went through all the things I just told you about occasion. I walked through the list of saying who I was, what the purpose was, even Dick and Dave Q99, so they knew that. What sort of what the audiences that Mill Mountain generally gets. I mean, all those kinds of things. And then and I put that in and it gave a really good first pass. And then I shaped it a little bit more. And one of the things that it did really well that I would have had a lot of trouble doing is recognizing what is a 30-second spot. Because when I've done this work in the past, oftentimes your favorite line gets cut because it comes in at 35 seconds. And so again, it kind of it knows intuitively that it's a 30-second radio spot, and it knows, how long that the copy takes to unfold. And that's something that's very difficult for me to do. The other thing I did is I just sort of asked it to sort of, use more Elvisy language. Anyway, so that's what I kind of put in, and I'll let you listen to the result. It started running, I think, Monday.
Hey, Dave, got a minute?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Look, we've had complaints. You're leaving peanut butter and banana sandwiches everywhere.
I can't help falling in love with snacks.
Mainly, it's the voice. You have got to stop talking like Elvis.
I tried, Dick, but I got all shook up about $1 Million Quartet at Mill Mountain Theater. It opens September 17th. It's burning love, man.
It's not just Elvis. Carl Perkins, Jerry Lee Lewis, Johnny Cash.
I know, I walked the line, but it leads straight to Graceland.
It runs through October 12th. Maybe then you'll be normal.
Don't be cruel, Dick. Get tickets at millmountain.org.
Okay, so that's kind of the final product. It'll have some music kind of layered in. Even now, because I'm always a tinkerer and nothing is ever finished, I think the joke of when he's talking, because I wanted to get my sort of micro purposes, I wanted to get across that $1 Million Quartet is not just about Elvis, right? And so I had a very long-winded version of that, and I liked how AI stripped it down and just said it's not just about Elvis, and it listed the names, right, so that that someone's a Jerry Lee Lewis fan, that's going to be about them, right? But the line that sticks out to me that I probably would cut now if it wasn't already being already produced was when he at the end of that he says, why don't you try being one of them for a while? There, or being, and he says, I know I walk the line, but it goes straight to Graceland, and that's a lot for a radio audience person to sort of process. Oh, okay, I walk the line is Johnny Cash. And then, but the line goes straight to Graceland. It's too subtle for radio. I think it's too quick. And so that's something if I had thought about it before it was produced, I would have tinkered with further and further. But I could have asked that of AI, and it would have maybe given me an alternate reading, any of those kinds of things. But again, so I could have probably gotten more Elvisy language in. And made it better than that than that actually was about a third draft. I could have gotten some closer to sort of and put in the work, but that's 3 hours, an hour or 3 hours that, that I'm not spending calling up people and trying to get, Mill Mountain Theater's actors and directors and staff interviews, right? I mean, it's just energy that then I don't have to do, other things that sort of keep the lights on there. So again, I know that we're going to get into a conversation about the ethics of all this, and we should, but I think that the bottom line is that you all are with organizations that do a lot of good in the world, and anything that you can do to focus on that, right? Because a lot of the writing you all have to do, quite frankly, isn't as fun as this. So is the writing I do, right? Like, I mean, quarterly reports and emails to donors, grants, right? I know that Jessica talked about that. You are in grant season, right? A lot of that language is really difficult. It's because it is so bland in a lot of ways, and so I think that AI can help you get really, really functional language, if you will, quicker, which is, I think, very, very beneficial. But also too, in more engaging materials, because of these sort of things I've been talking about writing from the bottom up and thinking about the audiences that you serve and all those kinds of things. And just one last thing, I think that might be the end of my presentation, but let me pop up one last thing here.
Hey, Dave, got a minute?
Oh, sorry. Okay. Is that once you build a piece, okay, because people tend to think of AI and also writing as a process, but writing as a process is never over. And so once you have a product, like if I had had time with this, I would have maybe even fed in the actual MP3 commercial into this, and I would have asked some questions of AI to kind of give me some feedback. So you can use this soap as a diagnostic with anything that you do. Have I fulfilled my purpose? Is it meeting the right audience, right? Are there other things going on around the subject that I need to incorporate? Is this the right style? And you can ask AI those things, and it gives you great answers. The other thing that AI does, and again, I don't think that we need to pop up the thread here, but it gave me alternatives. It said, would you like a version of this commercial where both people are infected by Elvis and fall into talking about Elvis, right? And I could have explored some things along those lines. So that's kind of a version of how I've used it with this one piece. But I use it a lot. Now there are some things that I am sort of reluctant to use. I'm getting ready to do a hoot and holler piece next week, and it's very personal. It's about my father, um, and some tragic stuff. The theme is the way we wore, and so if you would go back in time and know me in Chapel Hill in about 1987, I used to wear my father's trench coat around, and I thought I was a brooding poet. Blah blah blah. Right, so. I've got a good version of that. I'm having some struggles with the ending. I probably will use AI to come in and just take a piece of the three kind of versions I've got of the ending and see if it can synthesize, make it, a little bit more audience friendly and some things like that. But I have come in very late in using AI because it's such a personal story, right? I want to make sure that do as much work as I can on the front end to get it authentically voiced as possible. I will tell you though, I think the next iteration of AI is going to be an app where basically it will scrub every piece of writing that you've ever done in your entire life that you have on your computer's hard drive, and it will know your style better than you. And it gets a little bit scary, right? Now we're kind of into some scary waters, but you could, if you think about it, oftentimes you're tired, right? You're in grant processing season. You've got late hours, things like that. So there are sometimes that you are not the best you, right? And the other thing is this is always malleable. So if it spits out something you don't like or you feel like it's inauthentic, great. You have the power to further prompt and to further have that dialogue to tailor it to what you need it to be. Um, and again, I think even in that situation, I might be reluctant to use AI early on, but I can see if we had that app that I might run it through and see what it says. Like maybe it does have some sort of suggestions and things that are somewhat authentically me. So again, I know that might be a little bit of controversy, but I think these are things that we all are going to have to think about in the coming days and years, because AI is going to become more and more like that. And quite frankly, I know you all have heard this a lot, but the organizations that stick their head in the sand and don't use AI are just going to not be as efficient, right? I mean, other people are going to be doing that and they'll get to a polished version of a grant quicker than other people. And again, I think that there are things we all need to think about and how to use this tool responsibly. And hopefully that's exactly what we're going to do for the second half of this piece. But I think it's an important conversation to have, a vital conversation to have. And again, like I started off with, any tool can be used to hurt or harm, and we've got to just all make sure collectively that we're using it ethically and to accomplish the goals that help us to serve, the people that we're serving. And again, that's pretty much the end of my presentation. One last thing I'll pop up. I think that this is all in the chat, but glad to have this conversation further. Like I said, my email is in the chat, and you can. And my phone number is in my email signature, so I'm easy to find in that way. But having said all that, I really want to use this time. Hopefully, you all had some marginalia in your heads as I was talking. It set off some things that are going on in your organizations, or maybe some questions or concerns. And I just really want to not just you all talk to me, but to us all talk to each other and kind of learn some things from each other. So anyway, that's enough of my speech. Okay. Jamie, I think you got your digital hand up first.
I do. Um, I've been just the last couple of days in writing emails. It gives you the opportunity to polish what you're writing. So, obviously what I've written in the email is a first draft. I've been very impressed with what it comes back with in terms of polishing up my writing just in basic emails, which is, so I just wanted to throw that out there and challenge people to try it, because it's at first I was hesitant to try it, and after now I'm hooked.
Well, Jamie, this is a hard question, maybe on the spot, but can you think of a particular moment, like an example of something that it tweaked that worked really well for your email?
It reformatted it and made the kind of some of the points you've been making in terms of being more concise in my writing. Obviously it was a first draft, but I wouldn't have come up with some of the ideas that it did in terms of how it recrafted, had the same information, but put it in a different order and just made it clearer and crisper.
That's a great example. Yeah. I mean, again, I think that reader friendliness, right, is something, every time you write, anything, it's a monologue for you. You're the audience, right?
Mm.
And you got to think constantly, I got to turn this into a dialogue, and you get trapped in your own lenses.
Right. While folks are thinking, can you talk a little bit about kind of the specific tools you go to, like literally, when you're just getting started with this, if folks aren't familiar with the different tools out there, can you talk a little bit about that and where might be a good place to start for those who haven't tried it before?
Sure. I'm a big fan of Chat GPT. I do have I've played with Bard because our organization has that index, and I know some organizations Bard has got an interesting sort of feature in that you can kind of keep a document open at the same time and sort of kind of have more of a dialogue in that way. I don't think you need the paid versions of any of this, though. I think Chat GPT can do most of what we're talking about here. Again, who knows when they'll stop making it a free version. There are some limitations. One of the things that frustrates me about ChatGPT is if I'm working with something very long, like, okay, this is, you all will find out very quickly, I'm confessional. I've been trying to write a young Edgar Allan Poe novel for 20 years. And so I've got about 50 pages and I can only feed about 8 in at a time. And it does remember those sections and builds, but it's a hassle. I wish I could just drop in the whole thing and then kind of begin to work with it as a whole document in that way. So the free version does have some limitations for longer things, but the other thing is the ChatGPT is really great for a micro kind of indexing tool. Like you don't have to approach a whole email, right? Like you might be struggling with this one section and popping it in and just having a quick back and forth about a section of something. Grants, right? You've got those sort of predisposed sections. I think it's very, it's good at that short model of working with something small in that way because the bigger the text that you put in, it can kind of wander a bit, right? It can kind of wander off of its purpose of what it's trying to accomplish for you. The other thing I will say, and this is not what you exactly asked, but Chat GPT though tends to be overly positive. It's obviously like any algorithm trying to keep you using it. So it'll say things like, "This is a great concept for a Mill Mountain Theater commercial. You should be lauded for the approach." Blah blah blah. It's like, okay, buddy, you're just trying to keep me hooked, right? And that is across the board. Almost anything I've ever put in, it talks about, this is a really exciting idea, right? Which is what you would want if you're a writing center tutor, right? You're not going to sit down as a writing center tutor. Somebody comes in with their baby bird of their writing, and you go, "Well, this is terrible. You've got all sorts of work to do. I can't believe you even came in today," right? So it's good that it's positive, but I think it especially when you put in longer model things, I think it can kind of wander off its purpose that way. And again, you have to be wary of that ego stroke because that ego stroke is designed to keep you using it.
And Jamie asked whether you've used Gemini or Copilot before.
Like I said, I've used Copilot. Sorry, I think I said I said Bard. I've used my first sort of approach was I think Google's old one was Bard. And then I have used Copilot because we've got a Microsoft license. But really, I find myself over and over again just using the free version of ChatGPT because I am comfortable with the interface. It keeps and I think all of them do this, but it keeps my threads for anything I've ever done, which I really like because oftentimes I'll have to go back to a task and sort of reinvigorate it in a way. But yeah, that's kind of my the tools approach. Does that answer that question?
Yeah. I was just curious whether you'd use I use Gemini because I use lots of Google stuff, so I just go to that automatically. But I've heard good stuff about ChatGPT as well. One other thing, in another AI workshop I went to, they talked about the fact that you can take what you write and then say, "So do that in the voice of Anne Lamott."
Yep.
That's a really cool. It's amazing what it comes up with when you do your first draft and then put it in another voice of a good writer that you admire.
I love that, Jamie. I will say you may have just found one of my pain points, if I can use advertising language about AI, though, because I'm very worried about creatives, especially the visual creatives,
Yeah.
because somebody might be able to recognize that somebody's written something in a Stephen King style. But if I say I want an image of a subway train in combining the styles of Norman Rockwell and David Lynch, and it's going to spit out something that I'm not going to be able to recognize that's whose styles I'm utilizing, right? So I don't know. But
That's
I
a good
also see
point.
the advantage of that, right? That's the creatives to me is what I'm most nervous about AI because I think they're the most vulnerable. I mean, a lot of what this conversation we've had is about sort of functional language, right? Where we have to use this language to sort of accomplish the goals. But what do you do when, someone can take your entire catalog of graphic work and, throw it into a large model and say, okay, now I want, well, right. I mean, right now, I think Newsom's doing that with Trump's things, right? That's funny and all those kinds of things, but I am a little bit worried about what the effect of all this is going to have on the creative class.
I have a question. Question about style. So I've used it a little bit, and I'm wondering if like, for example, Jessica, when you're reading grant applications, can you tell if someone has used ChatGPT to help them, and is that a negative, or can you not tell?
Yeah, well, I mean, your question, Don, goes to kind of something I was going to bring up for us to chat through too when it grants, or we particularly are struggling with it with scholarship applications and students using AI to write their personal narrative and trying to come up with a policy that provides some guidance on what's acceptable and not. And I think there is some tension there around, for some of them, like in the scholarship applications, we could tell that, obviously they had relied on AI pretty heavily. But we don't want to say you can't use it at all, because obviously, as we've learned today, there's some ways that it can be highly effective. So I don't have a good answer for you, Don, in terms of our side of what our readers think. I can tell you that we're struggling with it. And I think the question, and maybe Brent could speak to this, is like how, as for us as a funder, like how do we provide guidance about what's acceptable and not, and getting at, particularly for scholarships, but even for grants, understanding the applicant in a way that doesn't feel like it's been over processed, I guess. I didn't mean to hijack your question, Don, if you want fun.
Other thoughts about that? I know some of you all out there have encountered as a writing audience, right? Like things that you've encountered that, oh, wow, that's definitely AI. Like, what are the tells? I mean, what have you all experienced out in the field?
I mean, I could say just with our scholarships, there were a few essays, and Laura can chime in if I'm misspeaking, but one that sounded a little similar, and that were like exactly the right number of characters within the box in a way that felt like they had said, okay, I need to say this within this number of characters. And it just sounded a little overwrought, I think. Laura, can you add to that at all?
Yeah, and it ended with in conclusion. And we were just asking for who they are, and what their ambitions were, and why a scholarship would be helpful. And we weren't asking for a thesis.
Yeah, and I think maybe what you bring up an interesting point, Laura, is that when we're looking at multiple applications, if we're seeing the same type of wording, then that suggests that they're using AI to write their essays. And the question we have to deal with is like, how comfortable are we with that? How can they use it to better craft their personal narrative versus asking it to really write on their behalf?
Yeah, and I guess to refine that, that can see it as a problem when you're expecting personal writing, but then I'm like, with the grant application, you're just trying to communicate information. Is that a negative that it helped you craft that in 2,500 characters? Because that's often what I did. Is I'm like, okay, this is the content, and I've got this much space. Help me put that together, right? But it does seem to have its own voice, right? And maybe you can, I don't know how to tailor that better, but I've noticed that when I put something in, it does tend to come out in a style that is ChatGPT, I guess. I don't know.
I have fought this battle in a different front, but it turns out I think it's a very similar front for 30 years, like I said, about students not being authentic in their voice and their writing. I mean, again, you can't say I in a lot of traditional academic papers and that kind of thing, but what's beautiful about all of us sitting down to write about climate change, right, is that we're all going to have personal experiences, things that we've read that we're going to bring to the table, right? And so it's all about getting those details to be authentic. And I think, yeah, Laura, you mentioned in conclusion, right? Yeah, I mean, that's the same battle that I fought with undergrads for years, right? It's like when you say in conclusion, you're writing in that inauthentic academic voice that I fought against a lot. I mean, I know there are certain, especially disciplines like the sciences and that kind of stuff, where you're supposed to almost extinguish yourself. But in the humanities, at least, I mean, I've always thought it's kind of a feint that you pretend that you're writing in a collective academic voice rather than you, because the things that you're. So again, as much as possible, I always try to encourage people to sort of be as authentic as possible. And this kind of segues into what Bass has asked on the chat about. Bass says, "How do you recommend someone introduce their company brand, tone, and voice before they start writing?" And I think that's a great point. I mean, I think it kind of comes back down to being authentic, right? Like having deep conversations about what is your brand, right? What makes 5 Points Marketing different from every other marketing agency, right? Or all those things. I mean, being able to answer those questions, and then again, it you can never, I think, give Chat GPT too much. You might want to even say for something that you were writing in there, here's our company mission statement, because you never know when it might take a piece of that and pop it in a really interesting way that serves your purpose. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Bass, but if you're still with us, but does that make sense as far as trying to answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, but I do think it's a struggle for authenticity. And it's funny because the complaints about AI are that it's inauthentic. But that's because people aren't, I mean, again, I think what's happened suddenly that everybody's adjusting to is in a lot of cases we're not writers, we're editors. But editing is vital because first draft of anything has both your strengths and weaknesses in it. And like I said, you go from a monologue to a dialogue. And so I think that the strength of AI is getting you out of the prison of yourself, if you will, and recognizing this needs to be consumed. Now, when it goes too generic, it's so reader friendly that it doesn't mean anything, right? Like the classic example of show don't tell. If you're looking at a cover letter and somebody says, I'm a hard worker who's always had strong communication skills, right? I mean, well, whoopity-doo, you can say that. It doesn't mean anything. That's not going to stick in my head. But if you then show examples of this, right? So a lot of times when I see something that's very that's clear that's been written by AI is the same first draft that I saw from students for years, where they didn't get deep into an issue because they didn't get into the details and they were inauthentic. I mean, again, pollution is a prevalent problem in today's society. If the response to the first line of your paper is duh, then you're in trouble.
Other questions or comments? We got a couple other resources in the chat too about recognizing AI writing. But I think kind of what you're saying, Brent's really interesting, is to think about, even as we're thinking about this with our scholarship recipients, is you're constantly going, if you're using AI well, you're constantly going back and kind of either adjusting your prompt or using what it spits out to make it more you. Like I think in your case, Don, if ChatGPT spitting out something that doesn't feel like you, then it, maybe it's helped organize your thoughts and then you can go back in and make it sound more like you. But somebody said to me once that AI is like your best intern, like they know a lot and they're very enthusiastic, but they need constant guidance. And that is, I always thought that was really interesting, is to kind of continuously add to your prompt or be able to go back and edit so you're using it effectively. I say that as if I use it a lot. I do not. So this is clearly instruction for me to do so. But other thoughts or experiences?
I like what you said, Jessica, about that. It made me think of something, and I think Bruce wouldn't be too uncomfortable with me sharing this story, but about an intern, right? When I first came to 5 Points, of course, the learning curve was pretty big, having been in academia for years. And one of the things I've always marveled about Bruce is his ability his communications with clients, right? I mean, he's really got a PhD in sort of that communication style. And so, but like many of us, he does not know how he does it. He does it for so long. To him, it's innate, and it's difficult for him to sort of extricate himself from himself and be able to communicate that. So I took about 20 of his emails to clients and put it through ChatGPT, and I said, can you tell me why this is effective communication, and break it down into 4 strategies that Bruce uses? And it became an internal presentation because it spat out, it consumed those 20 emails, and it said things that were somewhat expected, but somewhat not expected. Warm language, making sure that the purpose is front and center in the email, finding a personal connection. I mean, it might be stuff that you could get to, but the great thing was I asked it for examples from those emails. And so then it was not just giving me, precepts that you'd see in a PowerPoint, right? A bad PowerPoint, like what we've all seen, where people do bullet points of Bruce's communication is effective because of warm language, blah, blah, blah. It made it living. It pulled examples that sort of people then could get their head around. And, you can imagine in all of your organizations, I bet somebody there is better at email communications than you are. Again, Bruce was mine, right? You could do that, and all of a sudden you've got a tool then for how everyone in your organization can write better emails, or in that way. And so the applications were just endless. I used it to plan a trip to Italy, not over the summer. It was flawless. I will sometimes look in my fridge and say, okay, I've got these 7 items. What kind of recipes can I make out of this? I mean, it's huge. I mean, I think it's transformative in a lot of ways.
Guess I'm wondering if there's anyone here who's, not really tried it before, because that was my case when I first used it to help with my first ever annual report. And so I didn't even know an approach, but luckily I had a friend who said, okay, I'm like, I have to write an annual report. I've never done this before. And she said, I bet you have a bolded list of everything that you've accomplished past year already out. And I said, yeah. She said, take that and your text from your website that describes your mission, purpose, and what your program does, and copy and paste that into ChatGPT and your accomplishments for the year, and ask it to help you write a section, because I kind of knew what sections I needed. And I was just amazed at what it could spit out, because just getting some words on a page was a start for me there, right? And I could edit it from there, but like write a president's message, I don't know what that looks like, So anyway, I don't, so just maybe describing to people, okay, this is the interface, you copy and paste information into it and give it prompts,
Don, that's a great point. There's a concept in writing theory called bones, muscles, skin. And so you break down writing into 3 sorts of areas. Bones are just basically the overall thesis and kind of high ideas, right? So like what is the deep part of the argument? The skin is the details, right? The quotations, if you're writing a novel, it's the world building, right? All the beautiful details in that way. But the muscles are just basically that functional language that moves a reader through the rhetoric. And if you think about it, like again, I know I keep defaulting to student papers, but if you can think back when you were an undergraduate, the least fun part of writing a paper is constructing those topic sentences, intros, conclusions, because the fun is when you take a quote, like if you were writing an art history paper of a particular use of color in Monet, and you get excited about sort of taking what somebody else says and riffing off of them, and that's where the fun is. But then you've got to kind of bind that with topic sentences and transitions that make that a understandable argument, right? Like that you can orient your reader through the things that you're trying to convey. And ChatGPT is beautiful at that. And I really think that's just muscles, right? You're just moving the reader through. And a lot of annual reports and things like that have that kind of boilerplate language in there that's not fun to write. It's functional, and it's just moving a reader through what you really want to get them to the heart of your ideas. Peter Elbow, by the way, that's the person who kind of came up with that theory of bones, muscles, skin. Well, other thoughts? I don't want to take up anyone's time unnecessarily, but we've got some time. Anything that you all have concerns about AI, anything along those lines. I mean, every day there's a horror story in the news about AI. I think we're at that stage where collectively we're all kind of processing this sea change. If you go back and you would look at when radio came on the air, there were all these stories about how it would ruin people's minds and all those kinds of things. Any kind of new technology, it seems like we have this waves of euphoria and fear. But anyway, but there are some legitimate concerns out there. So anything along those lines, or do you all feel like we're good for the day?
Seeing any other questions? I think it'd be interesting for those of us who are newer to it. We can talk about this at the foundation, but even do a follow-up of just, working with folks and experimenting with ChatGPT, like just playing with it, to get used to it and figure out what makes you comfortable and not, might be something that we all need to do too. So kind of like you did, Don, is just taking accomplishments or things that we've already written and see how it works to make it more tangible. But I think you've, Brent, given me some good ideas, at least on like where to start and then how to use AI to just refine and improve what we're doing that saves time so that we're not sitting pulling our hair out trying to make something sound better on our own, I guess. Any other questions or comments for Brent?
I can't be quiet. Just one last thing that made me think of that,
Yeah.
Jessica, is I would love to be a participant in that workshop, because when I was in graduate school, we got all this theory about teaching and a lot of it was not very helpful. But what was helpful is we got together as graduate students and got a pizza and trade actual tricks in the classroom that worked. And I think that would be really beneficial as all of us come in and talk about, either a struggle or a triumph that we've had in the field, right, with an actual piece of writing. I would love to be part of that if you all want to get involved with that down the road.
Yeah. I think that might be a nice next step for this. And last month, we did a session on writing an annual report where we featured Dawn and Havenwood, which is great. So we've kind of got this trend here and sort of writing that this might be a nice next step in how we communicate about what our organizations do. Right. Well, if there are no other questions, thank you so much, Brent, for all your time and expertise. This was a huge help. Appreciate everyone chiming in as well for your thoughts. And we will continue to play with all of this, and we'll follow up from the foundation about some other opportunities maybe that we as nonprofits can use these tools a little bit more and learn from one another. So again, this recording will be posted next week if you want to go back to it. Brent's information is in the chat as well as the blog that he referred to. And just can't recommend the folks at 5 Points Creative more for the work that they've done for us, not just through these sessions, but we've had them do some marketing work too. And so just a good group of folks with a lot of good background. So if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to them. All right. Well, thanks everyone for your time this morning, and enjoy the rest of your Thursday.